There is a silence that falls after the clash of empires, a quiet more profound than the ceasing of battle cries and the cooling of swords. It is the silence of erased words, of forgotten songs, of a civilization's voice being slowly, methodically smothered beneath the weight of a new and alien tongue. This is a story about that silence, and about the man who refused to let it become the final sound. It is a tale that unfolds not on a battlefield of clashing armies, but within the heart of a single poet, a man who chose to wage a war not with a sword, but with a pen, against an enemy far more insidious than any king or conqueror, the slow, creeping death of memory itself. Before we journey further into this forgotten struggle, I invite you to stand with us in keeping these stories alive. Add your voice by liking this video and subscribing to the channel so that echoes of the past may continue to find new ears in the present. We must travel back 1,000 years to a land of breathtaking beauty and deep, unhealed wounds. The land is Persia, a place that once held the world in its grasp, a cradle of kings and prophets, of astronomers and artists. But the Persia of the 10th century is a fractured shadow of its former self. Centuries have passed since its last native emperors, the Sasanians, were swept away by the whirlwind from the desert, the great Arab conquests that forever altered the destiny of the East. The old religion of Zoroaster now flickers like a dying candle in hidden mountain temples, and the language of the court, the melodious Persian of the Shahs, is being steadily eroded by the dominant Arabic of the new rulers and their faith. The memory of what Persia was, the epic tales of its mythical founders, the grandeur of its godlike kings, the valor of its peerless heroes, is fading into the realm of folklore, dismissed as the fanciful stories of old men and the whispers of a conquered people. In this world of cultural twilight, in the ancient city of Tus, in the far northeastern province of Khorasan, a man named Abul-Qasem Ferdowsi listens. He listens to the stories his father, a landowner of the old noble class, tells him. He listens to the songs of wandering minstrels. He listens to the rustling of the wind through the cypress trees, a sound that seems to carry the echoes of a lost and glorious age. And in the silence between the words, he hears the encroaching void. He feels the soul of his nation going quiet, and a terrifying, magnificent, and ultimately life-consuming purpose begins to take root in his heart. He will not let the voices die. He will gather the scattered embers of his people's memory and breathe them back into a roaring, unquenchable flame. He will build a fortress of words, a sanctuary so vast and so powerful that it will withstand the siege of centuries. He will write a book of kings, a Shahnameh, and in doing so, he will give his lost nation its voice once more, a voice that would echo through the ages, long after the empires that sought to silence it had turned to dust and faded from memory. This is the secret legacy of the man from Tus, the story of how a single voice, armed with nothing but the ink of devotion and the parchment of a fading past, rescued a civilization from the abyss of oblivion. The world into which Ferdowsi was born was a tapestry woven from threads of fading grandeur and vibrant, often violent, new beginnings. To understand the monumental scale of his undertaking, one must first walk the dusty roads of 10th century Khorasan and feel the complex currents of power that defined his age. The memory of the Sasanian Empire, the last great Persian dynasty, was a ghost that haunted the landscape. It was a memory of immense power, of a realm that had stood as Rome's equal for 400 years, a civilization that had produced wonders of art, architecture, and administration. But it was also a memory of a cataclysmic fall, a swift and total conquest that had not only shattered a throne, but had also decapitated a culture. The Arab Caliphate, which had conquered Persia, had brought with it a new faith, Islam, and a new language, Arabic. For centuries, these two forces had worked to reshape the Iranian plateau, Arabic became the language of religion, of science, of government. To be a scholar, a courtier, an educated man, one had to master Arabic. The old Persian language, Pahlavi, with its intricate script, was relegated to the dwindling communities of Zoroastrians, the guardians of a faith now viewed with suspicion. Yet, the Persian spirit was not so easily extinguished. It was a deep and ancient river that had simply been forced underground. In the courts of local governors and in the private homes of the old landowning nobility, the Dayquans, to which Ferdowsi's family belonged, the old stories were still told. These were the men who, even as they adopted the new faith, saw themselves as the inheritors of a uniquely Persian legacy. They were the living libraries of a pre-Islamic past, the keepers of a national identity that refused to be assimilated. It was a time of political fragmentation. The great monolithic caliphate of Baghdad was weakening, its grip on the eastern provinces loosening. This created a power vacuum, and into it stepped new dynasties. The most significant for Ferdowsi's early life were the Samanids, a dynasty of Persian Dayquan origin who, while nominally loyal to the caliph, carved out a vast and semi-independent empire in Central Asia and northeastern Iran. The Samanid court in Bukhara became the heart of a Persian cultural renaissance. For the first time in centuries, the Persian language, now written in the Arabic script and enriched with Arabic vocabulary, was being actively promoted as a language of high literature and poetry. A new generation of poets and scholars began to emerge, tentatively at first, and then with a surge of creative energy. They were recovering the lost voice. They began the monumental task of collecting the scattered remnants of Persian history and mythology, piecing together fragments from old Pahlavi texts and oral traditions into prose compilations, creating what were essentially the first drafts of a national epic. It was a fragile dawn, a brief and brilliant window of cultural reawakening. But as Ferdowsi reached manhood, this Persian dawn was threatened by a new and formidable power rising in the south, the Ghaznavids. Led by Turkic slave soldiers who had seized power, the Ghaznavids were a martial dynasty, fiercely ambitious and staunchly Sunni orthodox in their faith. Their leader, Sultan Mahmud, was a brilliant and ruthless military commander, a conqueror who would carve out an empire stretching from Persia to India. But his court was culturally different from the Samanids. While he patronized poets, his preference was for panegyrics in Arabic and Persian that glorified his own conquests, not for epics that celebrated the deeds of long-dead Zoroastrian kings and pagan heroes. This was the complex and precarious world Ferdowsi inherited, a land saturated with the memory of a glorious past, experiencing a fragile cultural rebirth, yet facing the rise of a new foreign power that was at best indifferent and at worst hostile to the very soul of that ancient legacy. It was a world teetering on a knife's edge between remembrance and forgetting, and it was upon this edge that Ferdowsi would choose to build his life's work, a testament of such staggering ambition that it seemed like madness, a desperate gamble to save the soul of his world before the twilight deepened into an eternal night. The call to his life's work did not come to Ferdowsi in a single, thunderous moment of revelation, but as a slow, gathering conviction, a deep and persistent ache in the soul. It was the quiet sorrow of a man watching the tide of his own culture recede, leaving behind the bleached bones of a once vibrant world. He saw it in the way the young people of Tus spoke, their Persian peppered with more and more Arabic words, not out of necessity, but out of a sense of fashion and prestige. He heard it in the sermons at the mosque, where the glories of Arab history were extolled while the heroes of Persia were ignored or condemned as infidels. He felt it in the very air of his time, a sense of cultural rootlessness, of a people living in a house built by their ancestors, but no longer knowing the names of the architects or the stories carved into the foundation stones. For Ferdowsi, This was not merely a matter of linguistic preference or historical curiosity, it was a spiritual crisis. A nation, he believed, was not merely a collection of people living within certain borders, it was a community of memory. Without its stories, a nation was a body without a soul, an empty vessel adrift on the currents of time. The legends of Persia were not just tales of entertainment, they were the moral and philosophical DNA of his people. The story of King Jamshid, who ushered in a golden age of civilization but fell due to his own hubris, was a timeless lesson in the corrupting nature of power. The tragic tale of the noble Prince Siavash, a paragon of honor who is betrayed and murdered, was a profound meditation on injustice and the preservation of one's integrity in a corrupt world. And above all, the saga of the mighty hero Rostam, the flawed but steadfast defender of Iran, was the embodiment of the nation's strength, resilience, and unwavering sense of duty. To lose these stories was to lose the compass that had guided his people for millennia. He saw the work being done at the Samanid court, the prose collections of ancient lore, and he recognized their immense value. But he also saw their limitations. Prose could record facts and chronologies, but only poetry, he felt, could capture the fire, the passion, the living heart of the epic. Only the power of verse, with its rhythm and melody, could bypass the intellect and lodge these stories directly into the soul of the listener, to be memorized, recited, and passed down through generations. He envisioned a work of such immense scope and poetic power that it would become the definitive and permanent testament of his people's journey. It would be a book that began at the dawn of creation, with the first mythical kings who tamed the wilderness and taught humanity the arts of civilization. It would chart the rise and fall of great dynasties, the Pishdarians and the Kayanians, weaving together myth, legend, and history into a single, seamless narrative. It would be a grand stage for a cast of hundreds of characters, noble kings and treacherous usurpers, wise counselors and wicked demons, beautiful princesses and valiant warriors. And at its heart, it would be a chronicle of the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between Iran, the land of the noble Aryans, and Turan, the land of its perennial enemies, a cosmic battle that was mirrored in the moral struggles within each human heart. This was not a task for a single lifetime. It was the work of a generation, a monumental endeavor that would require absolute devotion, immense learning, and a poet's soul attuned to the deepest music of his language. And as the Samanid patronage began to wane and the shadow of the Ghaznavids grew longer, Ferdowsi realized with a chilling clarity that if he did not undertake this task, no one else would. The fragile dawn of the Persian Renaissance was ending, and the window of opportunity was closing. He was already a man of means, a respected landowner with no need to work. He could have lived out his days in comfort and obscurity. Instead, he made a choice. He chose to embark on a journey into the past, to become an archaeologist of the soul. He began to gather the fragments, the old prose chronicles, the scattered Pahlavi texts he could find, the oral tales he transcribed from the mouths of Zoroastrian priests and traveling storytellers. He spent his own fortune to acquire these precious sources. He turned his home into a scriptorium, his life into a monastic devotion to a single sacred purpose. For 30 years, he would shut himself away from the world, his only companions the ghosts of ancient kings and heroes. For 30 years, his pen would scratch across thousands of pages of parchment. For 30 years, he would pour his life, his wealth, and his very soul into the 60,000 rhyming couplets of the Shahnameh. It was a decision born of love and fear, a deep love for the world he was trying to save, and a profound fear of the silence that would follow if he failed. The journey into the Shahnameh begins not with a man, but with the world itself, born from the divine will. Ferdowsi, acting as a conduit for 1,000 years of myth, dips his pen into the ink of creation and paints a world of stark and elemental forces. In the beginning, there is only the cosmic struggle between good and evil, between the creator god, Ahura Mazda, and the spirit of darkness, Ahriman. This is the grand theme that will echo through every story, every battle, every human heart in his epic. The first king, Kayumars, is not a conqueror but a civilizer, a luminous figure who dwells in the mountains, clothed in the skins of leopards, and first establishes the rights of kingship. He is the archetypal father of his people, but his golden age is shattered by the envy of Ahriman, whose monstrous son kills the king's own beloved heir. Thus, from the very first pages, Ferdowsi establishes a central and heartbreaking theme of his work: the fragility of light, the sorrow of loss, and the cyclical nature of conflict. The torch of civilization is passed down through a line of legendary kings, each adding a new layer to the foundation of human society. King Hushang discovers fire by accident, striking a flint against a rock while trying to kill a monstrous serpent, and he teaches his people to honor this divine gift. King Timurus learns the arts of writing from the demons he has subdued, a powerful metaphor for the idea that wisdom can be wrested even from the forces of darkness. But it is under the reign of the great King Jamshid that civilization reaches its mythical zenith. Jamshid is the Persian Solomon, a king of unparalleled wisdom, power, and glory. For centuries, he reigns over a world free from sickness, death, and want. He teaches humanity how to weave cloth, to forge armor, to build with bricks and mortar. He establishes the different castes of society: priests, warriors, farmers, and artisans. He is the architect of a perfect world, a utopia on earth. His throne, studded with gems, is lifted into the heavens by demons, and from this vantage point, he surveys his flawless creation. But this perfection contains the seed of its own destruction. Gazing upon his own magnificence, Jamshid is overcome with pride. He forgets that his power is a gift from God and begins to see himself as the source of all good. This act of supreme hubris, this forgetting of the divine, is the cardinal sin in Ferdowsi's moral universe. The divine glory, the Fa, abandons him, and his kingdom is plunged into darkness and chaos. The story of Jamshid's fall is a profound and timeless tragedy, a cautionary tale that will resonate through the entire epic. It is Ferdowsi's warning to every king, every sultan, every person who holds power, that pride is the gateway to ruin, that forgetting the source of one's blessings is the surest way to lose them. The kingdom falls under the tyrannical rule of the monstrous usurper Zahak, a figure of pure evil, an Arab prince seduced by the whispers of Ahriman himself. Zahak is a nightmarish figure, famous for the 2 black serpents that grow from his shoulders, serpents that must be fed daily on the brains of the kingdom's youth. For 1,000 years, his reign of terror blankets the land. Fear and despair rule. But even in this darkest of nights, a flicker of hope remains. It comes in the form of a humble blacksmith named Kaveh, whose sons have been taken to feed the tyrant's serpents. In a raw and powerful scene, Kaveh storms the palace of Zahak, not with an army, but with a cry for justice. He raises his leather blacksmith's apron on a spear, creating a makeshift banner, and calls the people of Iran to rise up against the tyrant. This simple apron, the Darafs Kaviani, becomes the sacred banner of Persian resistance, a symbol that the fight for freedom can be started by the humblest of citizens. Kaveh's call is answered by a young prince of the royal line, Feridun, who leads the rebellion. After a great struggle, Zahak is overthrown, not killed, but imprisoned beneath the volcanic Mount Damaband, chained there until the end of time, a potent symbol that evil can be contained, but perhaps never fully eradicated. Feridun restores justice and divides his kingdom among his 3 sons, an act that, while well-intentioned, leads to the next cycle of tragedy. The envy of the 2 oldest sons for the youngest, Iraj, who inherits the heartland of Iran, leads to the first fratricide, a crime that unleashes a torrent of blood feuds and wars that will last for generations. In these opening chapters, Ferdowsi is not merely recounting myths. He is building the philosophical architecture of his world. He is establishing the eternal rhythm of history, a golden age, a fall through pride, a period of darkness and tyranny, and a heroic struggle for restoration and justice. It is a cycle of light and shadow, of order and chaos that will define the destiny of his nation, and it is a pattern he saw repeating itself even in his own time as the memory of a golden past was threatened by the darkness of forgetting. As the mythical age of creation gives way to the epic age of heroes, the canvas of the Shahnameh explodes with color, action, and raw human emotion. This is the heart of the epic, the grand central narrative that would become the bedrock of Persian identity. It is a world of warrior kings, of epic feuds between the rival nations of Iran and Turan, a world of supernatural wonders, of demons and magical birds, and of deeply human passions. Love, loyalty, jealousy, and tragic loss. And at the center of this world, like a great mountain that dominates the landscape, stands a single monumental figure, Rostam. He is the champion of Iran, its protector, its greatest hero, a figure so central and so beloved that he transcends the role of a mere character to become the very embodiment of the nation's soul. Ferdowsi lavishes his greatest poetic powers on the birth and life of this hero. Rostam's birth is itself a legend. His mother, Rudabeh, is unable to deliver such a colossal infant and is saved only by the intervention of the mythical Simorg, a great bird of wisdom who instructs his father, the hero Zal, on how to perform the first caesarean section, an operation that would be known for centuries in Persia as the Rustami birth. From his first moments, Rostam is destined for greatness. He is a giant among men, possessing the strength of 100 elephants, a warrior of immense prowess, yet also a figure of deep loyalty and, at times, profound sorrow. His life is a series of epic labors and battles in defense of a succession of often weak and foolish Kayanian kings. He is the unwavering pillar supporting a frequently unstable throne. His story is inextricably linked with that of his legendary steed, Rakhsh, a horse of incredible strength, intelligence, and loyalty. The bond between Rostam and Rakhsh is one of the most moving relationships in the epic, a partnership of warrior and companion that is as deep as any human friendship. Rakhsh is not merely an animal, he is Rostam's other half, his trusted ally in 100 battles, who often saves his master's life through his own cunning and courage. Ferdowsi chronicles Rostam's legendary Haft Khan, or 7 labors, a perilous journey he undertakes to rescue the foolish king Kavus, who has been captured by the demons of Mazandaran. This journey is a masterpiece of mythic storytelling, a veritable odyssey through a landscape of supernatural terror. Rostam battles a monstrous lion while he sleeps, aided by Rakhsh. He crosses a desert of burning sand, survives the seductions of a witch disguised as a beautiful woman, slays a fearsome dragon, and finally confronts and defeats the great white demon, Arjang Div. Each labor is not just a physical contest, but a spiritual and psychological test of his endurance, his cunning, and his unwavering resolve. These are the stories that would be told and retold by every generation of Iranians, the tales that would decorate the walls of palaces and tea houses, the foundational myths of what it meant to be a hero. They are tales of superhuman strength, but also of human vulnerability. Rostam is not a perfect, stainless knight. He can be hot-tempered, proud, and sometimes tragically blind to the consequences of his actions. He is a profoundly human hero, and it is this humanity that makes him so enduring. Through Rustam, Ferdowsi is crafting a national ideal. He is the champion his people needed, a symbol of unwavering strength in the face of relentless enemies, a guardian who would always answer the call to defend the land, no matter the personal cost. In an age when Persia was ruled by foreign kings and its own martial traditions were fading, the figure of Rostam was a powerful and subversive reminder of a native pre-Islamic heroism. He was a kingmaker, not a king, a servant to the throne, but greater than any man who sat upon it. He represented a kind of pure, untamed Persian spirit, loyal not to a specific ruler, but to the very idea of Iran itself. As Ferdowsi wrote these verses, hunched over his manuscript in his quiet room in Tus, he must have felt the power of what he was doing. He was not just recording old legends, he was forging a god, a national champion who would ride out of the pages of his book and into the hearts of his people, a timeless guardian who would watch over the soul of Persia long after Ferdowsi himself was gone. While the Shahnameh is a chronicle of kings and a celebration of heroes, its deepest and most enduring power lies in its profound exploration of tragedy. Ferdowsi understood that the human condition is defined not just by its triumphs, but by its sorrows, and that the heart is often shaped more by loss than by victory. Within the grand tapestry of his epic, he weaves stories of such heartbreaking pathos that they transcend their mythic setting to become universal meditations on fate, misunderstanding, and the devastating consequences of pride. The most famous and soul-crushing of these is the story of Rostam and his son Sohrab. It is a tale that has been compared to the great tragedies of Sophocles, a story that plumbs the very depths of grief and irony. Rostam, during his youthful travels, has a brief affair with Princess Tamina in a neighboring kingdom. He leaves her with a jewel, instructing her to tie it to the arm of their child, if it is a boy, as a secret sign of his parentage. A son, Sohrab, is born, and he grows into a warrior of prodigious strength and skill, a veritable mirror of his father. Driven by a fierce desire to know the father he has never met, Sohrab joins the army of Turan, Iran's great enemy, hoping that the chaos of war will somehow lead him to the legendary Rostam. The armies of Iran and Turan face each other across a plain, and the Turanian king, knowing Sohrab's secret, sends the boy out as his champion, anticipating a climactic duel that will decide the war. Rostam, not knowing the identity of this young, formidable Turanian warrior, rides out to meet him. What follows is a multi-day combat of epic proportions, a clash of two titans who are perfectly matched in strength and courage. They wrestle, they joust, they fight with swords and maces, and each time neither can gain a clear advantage. Rostam, for the first time in his life, feels his strength failing him against this unknown youth. He feels a strange, inexplicable love and admiration for his opponent, even as he seeks to defeat him. On the final day of their duel, using a moment of cunning, Rostam finally manages to throw Sohrab to the ground and, in the heat of battle, plunges his dagger into the young warrior's chest. As Sohrab lies dying, he speaks not of hatred, but of his quest to find his father, Rostam, who he knows will avenge his death. He tells his killer, "My father will demand my blood from you," and then, with his last breath, he reveals the jewel tied to his arm. In that moment of horrific recognition, the world collapses for Rostam. The triumphant roar of the Iranian army turns to ash in his mouth. He has killed his own son, the son he had longed for, the one person who could have carried on his heroic lineage. The scene that follows is one of the most powerful depictions of grief in all of world literature. Rostam is consumed by a suicidal despair, a sorrow so immense that it threatens to undo him completely. He has won the battle for Iran, but he has lost his own soul. The story of Rostam and Sohrab is a masterpiece of dramatic irony and a profound commentary on the destructive nature of war. which forces men to see each other only as enemies, blinding them to their shared humanity. It is also a tragedy of identity, of a father and son who are kept apart by secrets and the fog of conflict until it is too late. For Ferdowsi's audience, living in a fractured and often war-torn land, it was a story that spoke to the deep wounds of civil strife and the tragedy of a nation divided against itself. It was a reminder that the greatest victories on the battlefield can be the most devastating personal defeats. Through this tale, Ferdowsi immortalized a fundamental truth, that the hero's path is not one of glory alone, but of immense and unbearable suffering. He showed that even the greatest of men, the pillar of the nation, is subject to the cruel whims of fate and the tragic consequences of his own actions. In writing the story of Rostam's greatest sorrow, Ferdowsi gave his nation its greatest tragedy, a story that would forever serve as a powerful and heartbreaking testament to the profound and terrible cost of conflict. The tragic vein that runs through the Shahnameh is not limited to the battlefield. It extends deep into the perfumed courts and shadowy corridors of royal power. Ferdowsi, drawing from a deep well of Persian folklore and historical memory, presents a world where honor is a fragile treasure, easily shattered by the machinations of the jealous and the ambitious. No story illustrates this more poignantly than the tale of Prince Siavash, a narrative that stands as one of the epic's most sophisticated and psychologically complex tragedies. Siavash is the very model of a perfect prince. He is handsome, skilled in all the arts of war and peace, and possessed of an unwavering moral purity. He is the beloved son of the often foolish King Kavus. The prince's troubles begin within his own father's harem, in a story that echoes the biblical tale of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. The king's beautiful and manipulative wife, Sultan, becomes infatuated with her stepson and attempts to seduce him. Siavash, horrified, rejects her advances. Enraged and humiliated, Sultan accuses the prince of having assaulted her. The king, caught between his love for his son and his passion for his wife, is thrown into turmoil. To prove his innocence, Siavash must undergo a trial by fire. In one of the epic's most iconic scenes, he rides his black horse through a mountain of roaring flames. He emerges on the other side completely unscathed, a clear sign of divine judgment in his favor. Though his innocence is proven, the court has been poisoned against him. The relationship with his father is strained, and Siavash feels a deep sense of disillusionment with the world of politics and intrigue. Seeking to escape the toxic atmosphere of his father's court, he volunteers to lead an army to the frontier to negotiate a peace with the perennial enemy, Turan. Through his nobility and diplomatic skill, he succeeds in forging a treaty with the wise and honorable king of Turan, Afrasiab. He is welcomed as a guest of honor in the Turanian court, where he finds the respect and admiration that were denied to him at home. He marries Afrasiab's beautiful daughter, Ferangis, and the king gives him his own province to rule, a place he names Siavashgurt. For a time, it seems that Siavash has found a new life, a peaceful kingdom built on honor and mutual respect. He has escaped the corruption of his past. But the serpent of envy is never far away. The Turanian courtiers, led by the wicked Ghasibas, grow jealous of the Persian prince's influence and favor with their king. They begin to poison Afrasiab's mind with lies and rumors, suggesting that Siavash is building an army to overthrow him. Afrasiab, his mind clouded by suspicion, eventually turns against his son-in-law. The tragedy that unfolds is slow, deliberate, and agonizing. Siavash, knowing he is innocent but seeing that he is doomed, refuses to flee or to raise his hand against his father-in-law, to whom he has sworn an oath of loyalty. He chooses to face his unjust fate with a stoic and heartbreaking dignity. He is captured and, in a brutal and sacrilegious act, is dragged to a desolate basin and executed, his innocent blood spilling onto the barren earth. The murder of Siavash is not just a personal tragedy, it is a cosmic crime, an act that stains the world and unleashes a new and terrible cycle of vengeance. From the spot where his blood falls, a plant with a single beautiful flower is said to have grown, a perennial symbol of his innocence. His death ignites a great war of revenge led by Iran, which will last for generations and consume countless lives. The story of Siavash is Ferdowsi's masterful exploration of political intrigue and the tragic fate of the truly honorable man in a world of lies. Siavash is a Christ-like figure, a martyr to his own purity. He is a man who, at every turn, makes the right and honorable choice, and yet is relentlessly destroyed by the envy and wickedness of those around him. For Ferdowsi's audience of Dekwans, the old Persian nobility who often found themselves navigating the treacherous politics of foreign Turkic or Arab courts, the story of Siavash was deeply resonant. It spoke to their own precarious position, their own struggle to maintain a sense of Persian honor and integrity while serving rulers they often distrusted. It was a story about the fragility of goodness, about the way that suspicion can corrode even the strongest bonds of love and loyalty. And it served as a powerful reminder that the greatest tragedies are often not the result of a single evil act, but of a slow, creeping poison of whispers, lies, and doubt that can turn a paradise into a wasteland and a beloved friend into a deadly enemy. As Ferdowsi's pen moves through the centuries, the mists of pure mythology begin to recede, giving way to the hazy light of semi-legendary history. The narrative transitions from the age of epic heroes to the era of historical kings, culminating in the rise of the last great native Persian dynasty, the Sasanians. While this section of the Shahnameh is grounded more in historical chronicles, Ferdowsi's approach remains that of a poet, not a historian. He is not interested in a dry recitation of dates and events. He is seeking the moral and epic truth within the historical record. His goal is to connect the Persia of his own time to its imperial past, to show his readers that the glories he has been describing are not just the stuff of ancient myth, but are part of a continuous living tradition that flows directly to them. The Sasanian portion of the epic begins with Ardashir I, the founder of the dynasty, who overthrew the Parthians and consciously set about to restore the glory of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. Ferdowsi portrays Ardashir not just as a conqueror, but as a great restorer of order and a champion of Persian identity. He is the unifier who rekindles the sacred fires of Zoroastrianism and reestablishes the proper rights of kingship after centuries of foreign Hellenistic and Parthian rule. He is the figure who bridges the long gap in the narrative, linking the legendary past to a verifiable historical reality. The reigns of the great Sasanian monarchs are presented as a series of moral exemplars. Shapur the Great, who famously captured the Roman Emperor Valerian, is depicted as a model of a just and powerful king. Bahumgur is the archetypal hunter king, a figure of immense vigor and romantic adventure, whose life is filled with tales of hunting lions and wild asses and of encounters with beautiful princesses in disguise. But it is the reign of Khosrow I, known as Anushirvan, the immortal soul, that Ferdowsi holds up as the ultimate ideal of a just and wise ruler. Khosrow Anushirvan is the philosopher king, the Persian Marcus Aurelius. His court is a center of learning and justice, a place where scholars from Greece and India are welcomed. Ferdowsi recounts numerous anecdotes illustrating Khosrow's wisdom and his unwavering commitment to justice for the common man. In one famous story, the king is building a new palace, and an old woman refuses to sell her small plot of land that adjoins the site. The king's advisors urge him to take the land by force, but Khosrow refuses, ordering that the palace be built around the old woman's house, leaving it standing as a testament that the king's power is not absolute and that the rights of the humblest subject must be respected. The crooked wall of the palace becomes a permanent symbol of the straightness of the king's justice. Through these stories, Ferdowsi is creating a mirror for princes, a guide to just rulership for the sultans and emirs of his own day. He is implicitly contrasting the wisdom and justice of these native Persian kings with the often arbitrary and brutal rule of the foreign dynasties of his time. He is reminding them of the Persian ideal of kingship, an ideal based on justice, dad, wisdom, kerad, and a sacred duty to protect the people. But as with all things in the Shahnameh, this golden age is destined to fall. The final chapters of the epic chronicle the decline of the Sasanian dynasty, weakened by internal strife and disastrous wars with the Byzantine Empire. The narrative takes on a deeply somber and elegiac tone as it approaches the inevitable catastrophe. The final Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, is a tragic and doomed figure, a young and inexperienced ruler who inherits a crumbling empire on the brink of invasion. The sense of impending doom is palpable. Ferdowsi masterfully builds the suspense and the pathos, leading his readers towards the moment that has haunted the Persian imagination for centuries, the Arab conquest. He recounts the story of the pivotal Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, not from the perspective of a triumphant new faith, but from the perspective of the vanquished. He gives voice to the despair and disbelief of the Persian commanders as their ancient and glorious army is defeated by a force they had underestimated. The most poignant and powerful passage in this section is a long prophetic letter written on the eve of the final battle by the Persian general Rostam Farrokhzad, a historical figure, not to be confused with the mythical hero Rostam. In this letter, the general laments the coming darkness. He predicts that the throne of the Shahs will be overthrown, that the customs of Iran will be replaced by those of the desert, that men will turn to greed and falsehood, and that the long, glorious day of Persia is setting into an endless night. It is a heartbreaking lament for a lost world, a cry of anguish that echoes across the centuries. In this moment, the voice of the Sasanian general and the voice of the poet Ferdowsi merge into one. Ferdowsi is not just recounting the end of a dynasty, he is mourning the fall of his own civilization, the very event that created the broken world he inherited. The epic that began with the creation of the world ends with the destruction of his world, bringing the reader full circle. The final verses of the Shahnameh are a testament to the poet's courage. In an age when praising the Islamic conquest was the only safe political and religious position, Ferdowsi dared to tell the story from the other side. He gave voice to the sorrow, the dignity, and the tragedy of the vanquished, ensuring that their memory would not be erased by the victor's narrative. He ended his great epic not with a celebration, but with a tear, a final, loving tribute to the lost world he had so painstakingly resurrected in his 60,000 verses. For 3 decades, the Shahnameh was Ferdowsi's entire world. While dynasties rose and fell outside his window, while the currents of political power shifted and the map of his world was redrawn, his own life was governed by a different calendar, a different rhythm. It was a rhythm dictated by the steady scratching of his pen on parchment, by the metronomic cadence of rhyming couplets, by the rising and setting of suns that marked not the passage of his own days, but the passage of centuries in the life of his nation. This was not the romantic work of a court poet dashing off elegant verses in a perfumed garden. This was hard, relentless, solitary labor, a self-imposed exile from the world of the living into the world of ghosts and echoes. To undertake such a monumental task required a sacrifice that is difficult to comprehend in our modern age. It was a sacrifice of time, of companionship, of life's simple pleasures. But most tangible of all, it was a sacrifice of wealth. The creation of a book like the Shahnameh was an enormously expensive enterprise. The parchment alone, requiring the skins of hundreds of animals, would have cost a fortune. The inks had to be sourced and prepared. Scribes may have been needed to create fair copies. And most importantly, the sources themselves, the old and rare prose chronicles, had to be purchased, often at great cost, from collectors or from the libraries of wealthy patrons. Ferdowsi, a man of the landowning Deha Khan class, was not fabulously wealthy, but he was comfortable. He had inherited enough land to live a life of leisure. Over the course of 30 years, he systematically liquidated his inheritance, pouring his own fortune into the creation of his masterpiece. He sold his lands piece by piece to buy the fuel for his creative fire. He was, in essence, transmuting his ancestral soil into the immortal pages of his book. There is a profound symbolism in this act. He was trading the tangible physical inheritance of his family for an intangible spiritual inheritance for his entire people. He was converting his own personal past into the collective memory of his nation. This long, slow process of self-impoverishment was also a process of isolation. The work demanded a monk-like devotion. Days would have been spent cross-referencing sources, wrestling with a difficult turn of phrase, searching for the perfect rhyme that would not only fit the meter, but would also deepen the meaning of the verse. Nights would have been spent with his mind still churning, living inside the world he was creating, walking with Rostam on his perilous journey, weeping with Firangis over the body of Siavash, standing with the lost Sasanian king as his empire crumbled. Such an obsession inevitably builds a wall between a person and the ordinary world. While his neighbors were concerned with harvests and local politics, Ferdowsi was concerned with the fate of mythical kings. His dedication was likely seen by many as a strange and foolish obsession. The quixotic quest of a man squandering his wealth on a book of old pagan tales in an age that had ostensibly moved on. We can imagine the scene: the aging poet, his back bent, his eyes strained from decades of reading and writing by oil lamp, his fingers stained with ink. His own life is draining away, his hair turning the color of snow, his hands beginning to tremble. But as his physical body weakens, the world he is building grows stronger and more vibrant with each passing day. He is like a master architect overseeing the construction of a great cathedral, knowing he will not live to see it fully completed in all its glory, but driven by the faith that it will stand for 1,000 years. He was not just writing a book, he was performing a sacred rite. He was a chronicler, but he was also a shaman and necromancer who was calling forth the spirits of the dead and giving them voice. He was painstakingly weaving a great shroud, a burial cloth made of words, to honor and protect the body of his dying culture. But it was also a seed bank, a vessel containing the vital essence of that culture, which could one day be replanted and brought back to life. The 30 years of labor were an act of profound faith. There was no guarantee of success. The finished work might have been ignored, dismissed, or even destroyed. He had no powerful patron to protect him, no royal commission to fund him. He was sustained only by his own unwavering belief in the importance of his mission. He was answering a call from the past, a whisper from the generations of his ancestors, and he was determined to provide an answer that would echo into the far future. The sacrifice was total. He gave his book, his time, his wealth, and his life. And in return, the book gave him immortality. After 30 years of relentless labor, the moment of completion finally arrived. Around the year 1010, the old poet in his study in Tus wrote the final couplet of his monumental work. The Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, was finished. 60,000 verses, a chronicle of 50 reigns, a labor of a lifetime, lay complete before him. But the completion of the work was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new and perilous one. A book of this magnitude could not simply be published and distributed. To ensure its survival and dissemination, it needed a powerful patron, a royal seal of approval that would elevate it from a private obsession to a national treasure. And in the world of 11th century Persia, there was only one power significant enough to fulfill that role: Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni. The decision to present the Shahnameh to Mahmud was a logical one, but it was fraught with danger and deep, tragic irony. Mahmud was the most powerful ruler of his time, a man whose empire stretched from the borders of India to the heart of Persia. A dedication from him would guarantee the book's fame and preservation. Yet, Mahmud was everything the heroes of the Shahnameh were not. He was a Turk, not a Persian. He was a zealous Sunni Muslim with little patience for the Zoroastrian mythology that filled the pages of the epic. He was a pragmatic and often ruthless conqueror, a man of the sword, not a man of ancient lineage or epic ideals. There was a fundamental clash of worldviews, a deep cultural chasm that separated the poet from the Sultan. Nevertheless, Ferdowsi, now an old man, undertook the arduous journey from his home in Tus to the magnificent Ghaznavid court in what is now modern-day Afghanistan. We must imagine the scene, a moment thick with historical weight. The aging poet, a living link to Persia's ancient past, stands before the throne of the new master of the East. He carries with him not a tribute of gold or jewels, but a tribute of memory, a world bound in leather, the distilled soul of the very people the Sultan now ruled. The legends surrounding this encounter are many, and they form a crucial part of Ferdowsi's own story. It is said that at first, Mahmud was impressed. He had other Persian poets at his court, and he appreciated the power of verse to glorify his reign. Ferdowsi, according to some accounts, recited passages from his work, perhaps the thrilling tales of Rostam's battles, which would have appealed to the Sultan's martial spirit. The story goes that Mahmud, impressed by the sheer scale of the work, promised the poet a gold dinar for every couplet, 60,000 gold coins, a truly royal sum that would have restored Ferdowsi's fortune and rewarded him for his life sacrifice. But the initial enthusiasm soon soured. The Sultan's courtiers, perhaps jealous of this newcomer, began to poison their master's mind. They whispered that the book was filled with praise for infidel kings and pagan heroes. They pointed out that its hero, Rostam, was a far more compelling figure than any of the Sultan's own ancestors. Most damningly, they likely accused Ferdowsi of being a Shia sympathizer, a heretical charge in the fiercely Sunni court of Mahmud. The Sultan, a man known for his religious zeal and his volatile temper, began to have second thoughts. When the time came for payment, the promised 60,000 gold coins did not arrive. Instead, a caravan delivered 60,000 silver dirhams, a fraction of the promised value, an amount that was not a reward, but an insult. It was a gesture of profound contempt, a dismissal of 30 years of labor, a statement that the epic history of Persia was worth little more than common silver in the eyes of its new ruler. The moment of betrayal was absolute. For Ferdowsi, this was not just about the money. He had spent his own fortune on the book and was not a man driven by greed. It was about the lack of recognition, the failure of the king to understand the value of what he had been given. It was the ultimate rejection of his life's work by the one man whose approval could have secured its place in the world. The poet who had chronicled the betrayals of ancient kings now felt the sting of a modern one. The man who had given a voice to a nation was now left speechless by the deafness of its ruler. The grand and heroic world of the Shahnameh had collided with the petty and cynical reality of court politics, and the result was a deep and bitter disillusionment. The insult of the silver coins was more than just a broken promise. It was a spark thrown upon the dry tinder of a proud and weary soul. The reaction of Ferdowsi, as immortalized in legend, was not one of subservient disappointment, but of towering, defiant rage. This was the moment the quiet scholar, the patient chronicler of history, became a hero in his own right, a man who would use his only weapon, his voice, to speak truth to power regardless of the consequences. The story, which has the burnished quality of a foundational myth, is told with relish. Upon receiving the sacks of silver, Ferdowsi did not even count them. He walked from the palace to a nearby bathhouse, and in a gesture of magnificent contempt, he divided the entire sum in two. He gave one half to the bathhouse keeper and the other half to a street vendor selling refreshments. He treated the king's royal payment as little more than loose change, a tip for common laborers. The message was unmistakable and utterly audacious. A king's word, when broken, is worthless, and his treasure, when given in bad faith, is nothing but dross. This act of public defiance was tantamount to a death sentence. To so openly humiliate a ruler as powerful and as notoriously ill-tempered as Sultan Mahmud was, an act of incredible, almost suicidal courage. Ferdowsi knew he could not remain in Ghazni. He fled the city under the cover of darkness, becoming a fugitive and an exile, an old man on the run from the most powerful monarch of his age. But his defiance was not finished. His most powerful act of revenge was yet to come. As he traveled, seeking refuge in the courts of other, lesser rulers, he composed a new piece of work. It was not an epic of kings, but a satire, a scathing, venomous invective directed at Sultan Mahmud himself. This satire, which was for a time appended to the preface of the Shahnameh, is a masterpiece of righteous fury. In it, Ferdowsi mocks the Sultan's lowly origins, contrasting his slave ancestry with the noble lineage of the Persian kings celebrated in the epic. He decries the Sultan's lack of culture, his greed, and his broken promises. He pours all of his bitterness and disillusionment into verses that are as sharp and as deadly as a dagger. He asks, "Had the king's mother been a princess, he would have placed a golden crown on my head. But as he is the son of a slave, he could not value my art." It was a devastating and deeply personal attack, a poet's curse upon a king. This act reveals the core of Ferdowsi's character. He was a man who had spent his life in the company of epic heroes, and in his moment of trial, he behaved like one. He valued his honor, his name above all else, above wealth, above comfort, and even above his own life. The Sultan had insulted his work, and by extension, he had insulted the memory of Persia itself. For Ferdowsi, this was a crime that could not be left unanswered. He was Rostam, standing alone against a foolish and unjust king. He was Kaveh the blacksmith, raising the banner of defiance against a tyrant. His flight into exile was a painful and ignominious end to his quest for patronage. He wandered for years, an old and impoverished man seeking protection from Mahmud's wrath. But in a deeper sense, this final act of defiance was the only fitting conclusion to his life's story. It was the moment he stepped out from behind the curtain of his own epic and took his place on the stage alongside the heroes he had immortalized. He had shown that the spirit of defiant honor that he had so lovingly chronicled in the Shahnameh was not just a relic of a bygone age. It was a living fire that could still burn in the heart of a Persian poet. The Sultan had his armies, his wealth, and his power. But Ferdowsi had his voice, and he had used it to deliver a wound to the king's legacy that would never fully heal. The story of the poet's curse would be told and retold for centuries, a timeless reminder that the power of a just word can sometimes be greater and more enduring than the power of a king's sword. The final years of Ferdowsi's life are shrouded in the mists of poignant legend, a fittingly tragic and beautiful epilogue to a life lived in service to an epic past. After fleeing the wrath of Sultan Mahmud, the aged poet became a wanderer. He was a king of words with no kingdom, a man who had built a monument for his nation but had no home for himself. He sought refuge in the courts of various local rulers, but none were powerful enough to offer him permanent protection from the long reach of the Ghaznavid Sultan. Eventually, broken by age, poverty, and disillusionment, he made his way back to his beloved hometown of Tus, the place where his long journey had begun. He returned not as a celebrated national poet, but as a fugitive, living out his final days in obscurity and seclusion, perhaps finding his only solace in the familiar landscapes that had first inspired him. He died around the year 1020, an old man whose great work had seemingly been rejected by the powerful and forgotten by the world. But the story does not end there. History, like poetry, has a deep sense of irony. The most enduring legend associated with Ferdowsi's death is that of Sultan Mahmud's remorse. The tale recounts that years later, the Sultan was in the midst of a campaign when one of his courtiers quoted a powerful verse from the Shahnameh to sway him towards a merciful decision. Struck by the wisdom and beauty of the line, Mahmud asked who had written it. When he was reminded that it was from the great epic by the poet from Tus, whom he had so poorly rewarded, he was overcome with a wave of guilt and regret. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He recognized the immense value of the gift he had been given and the shabby injustice of his response. Seeking to make amends, he ordered that the promised 60,000 gold dinars be sent to Ferdowsi in Tus at once, along with his royal apologies. A great caravan laden with treasure was dispatched from the capital. It made its way across the plains and mountains to the distant city of Tus. And here, the legend delivers its most heartbreaking and cinematic twist. As the royal caravan, with its banners flying and its camels laden with gold, entered the city through one gate, another, much humbler procession was exiting through the opposite gate. It was the funeral cortege of the poet Ferdowsi, a small group of family and friends carrying his body to its final resting place. The king's reward had arrived, but it was a lifetime too late. The tragedy is compounded by one final insult. The local Sunni cleric in Tus, a man of rigid orthodoxy, refused to allow Ferdowsi to be buried in the main Muslim cemetery. He declared that the poet, who had spent his life glorifying pagan kings and Zoroastrian heroes, was a heretic and unworthy of being laid to rest in consecrated ground. This final act of posthumous rejection by the religious establishment was the ultimate symbol of the conflict that had defined Ferdowsi's life, the struggle between a narrow, dogmatic present and a vast, inclusive vision of his nation's past. And so, the man who had built a timeless home for the soul of Persia was denied a simple plot of earth in his own hometown. He was buried not among the righteous, but in the family orchard, a quiet plot of land within the walls of his own garden. It was a humble end for a man of such monumental achievement. And yet, there is a profound and beautiful justice in it. He was laid to rest in his own soil, the very earth of Khorasan that he loved and whose stories he had told. He was buried among the trees that he himself had planted, a poet returned to the land that had nourished his art. His final resting place was not a monument built by a king, but a simple garden, a place of natural beauty and quiet contemplation. It was a tomb that symbolized the very essence of his work, a legacy that grew not from the patronage of the powerful, but from the native soil of his own culture, a voice that was ultimately independent of any king or cleric, a quiet and enduring presence that would outlast them all. The caravan of gold, it is said, was given to his daughter, who, in a final act of filial piety and defiant pride, refused to accept the blood money that had come too late for her father. Instead, she used it to repair a local caravanserai, a rest stop for travelers, turning the symbol of a king's failed promise into a lasting monument of public service. The secret legacy of Ferdowsi is not that he wrote a book, but that he performed a miracle of cultural resurrection. His true accomplishment was not the 60,000 verses themselves, but the world they saved from oblivion. When Ferdowsi began his work, the Persian language was in retreat, and the collective memory of pre-Islamic Iran was a scattered and fading mosaic. By the time he laid down his pen 30 years later, he had not just preserved that memory, he had reforged it, giving it a definitive, powerful, and utterly intoxicating voice that would echo for 1,000 years. The Shahnameh did more than just save a collection of stories. It saved the very soul of a language. In an age when Arabic was the dominant language of power and prestige, Ferdowsi made a conscious and radical choice. He chose to write his epic in a pure and muscular Persian, deliberately avoiding the ornate Arabic loanwords that were fashionable in the court poetry of his day. He reached back into the deep linguistic soil of his homeland, seeking out old and potent words, crafting a style that was both timeless and accessible. The result was a book that became the cornerstone of modern Persian. It acted as a linguistic anchor, a standard of clarity and beauty that all future generations of Persian writers would look to. By giving the language such a monumental work of art, he ensured its survival and prestige. He proved that Persian was not just a vernacular tongue, but a language capable of expressing the highest peaks of epic poetry and the deepest valleys of human emotion. He built a fortress for his language, and within its walls, Persian literature would flourish for centuries to come. But the legacy is deeper than linguistics. The Shahnameh became the central pillar of Iranian identity. It provided a continuous narrative that connected the Persian people of the Islamic era to their ancient, glorious, and non-Arab past. It gave them a pantheon of heroes, Rostam, Siavash, Esfandiar, who were uniquely their own. It gave them a foundational mythology, a shared set of values, a common frame of reference. To be Persian, after Ferdowsi, was to know the stories of the Shahnameh. It was to understand the tragedy of Sohrab, to admire the justice of Banu Shirvan, to feel a surge of pride at the defiance of Kaveh. The book became a unifying force in a politically fragmented world, no matter who ruled in Isfahan, Shiraz, or Herat. Whether they were Turks, Mongols, or Afghans, the Shahnameh remained the undisputed national epic, a constant and powerful reminder of a shared Persian cultural heritage that transcended politics and dynasties. Its influence permeated every aspect of Persian culture. The stories were not confined to the page. They became the subject of countless miniature paintings, creating one of the world's most sophisticated traditions of manuscript illustration. They were depicted on pottery, metalwork, and textiles. Storytellers, called nakals, would recite the verses in coffee houses, holding audiences spellbound with the tales of ancient heroes, a tradition that continued into the 20th century. The Shahnameh was not a dusty classic sitting on a shelf. It was a living, breathing part of the nation's daily life, and perhaps most secretly, it was a subtle but persistent form of resistance. By celebrating a pre-Islamic past, by lionizing Zoroastrian heroes, and by telling the story of the Arab conquest from a Persian perspective, the Shahnameh offered a powerful counter-narrative to the dominant culture of the Caliphate and its successor states. It was a declaration that even though Persia had been conquered and had converted to Islam, it had not been culturally assimilated. It had retained its own unique soul, its own distinct history, its own proud and ancient voice. This is the ultimate paradox and the greatest triumph of Ferdowsi's legacy. The man who died in poverty and obscurity, who was denied a proper burial by the religious authorities of his day, became the single most important figure in the preservation of his culture. The book that was scorned by a powerful sultan became the book that would define a nation. The voice that was almost silenced by the march of history became the eternal echo of Iran, a testament to the incredible power of a single individual armed with nothing but love for his heritage, to stand against the tide of forgetting and, through a lifetime of sacrifice, ensure that the soul of his nation would never be lost. The garden in Tus that holds his remains is now a grand mausoleum, a site of national pilgrimage. The humble poet from the provinces is now revered as the father of his nation's literature, the guardian of its identity. The secret is out. The lost voice was never truly lost. It was just waiting in the 60,000 verses of a quiet and determined man to be heard again. And so we stand at the threshold of the poet's garden, at what feels like the end of a story, but is in fact the beginning of an echo that continues to reverberate through the centuries. The legacy of Ferdowsi is a profound testament to the paradox of power. The great Sultan Mahmud, the conqueror of India, the man whose name struck fear into the hearts of kings, is now largely a figure for historians. His empire long since turned to dust, his conquests footnotes in the annals of time. But the poor poet he scorned, the old man he sent into exile, is alive. He lives every time a child in Tehran or Kabul or Dushanbe hears the story of Rustam and Raksh for the first time. He lives in the sublime brushstrokes of the miniature painters who brought his verses to vibrant life. He lives in the cadence and rhythm of the Persian language itself, a language that bears the indelible imprint of his genius. He lives in the very idea of Iran, a nation whose modern identity is inextricably woven from the threads of his epic tapestry. The Shahnameh is more than a book. It is a river of memory that flows through 1,000 years of Persian history. It has nourished the roots of countless other works of art and literature. Poets like Hafez and Sadi, who are more famous in the West, drank deeply from its waters. Mystics and philosophers found in its tales profound allegories for the journey of the soul. Even in times of national crisis and foreign invasion, the Persian people have turned to the Shahnameh for solace and inspiration, for a reminder of their own resilience, for the story of a people who have faced darkness and destruction time and again and have always endured. It taught them that true kingship is defined by justice, not by power. That true heroism is found in duty and sacrifice, not in conquest, and that honor is a treasure more precious than any crown. Ferdowsi's work is a powerful reminder that the victors do not always get to write the final version of history. He took the narrative of his people's greatest defeat, the Sasanian collapse, and transformed it not into a story of shame, but into a noble tragedy, a tale of a great civilization that fell not because it was weak, but because it was betrayed by fate. He gave his people a way to understand their own history, that preserved their dignity and honored their ancestors. This is the ultimate power of the storyteller. They can take the raw, brutal facts of history, the battles, the conquests, the betrayals, and weave them into a narrative that gives them meaning, a story that can heal the wounds of a nation and shape its destiny. Ferdowsi was the ultimate master of this art. He was a historian of the heart, a poet who understood that the soul of a people resides not in its monuments of stone, but in its monuments of words. The secret legacy of Ferdowsi is the enduring truth that a civilization is not truly conquered until its stories are silenced. And his great gift to his people and to the world was to ensure that the voice of Persia would never fall silent. It remains a voice of epic grandeur, of profound sorrow, and of indomitable spirit. It is a voice that speaks of the timeless struggle between light and dark, a voice that celebrates the flawed but magnificent pageant of humanity, a voice that, once heard, can never be forgotten. It is the lost voice that was found, the quiet whisper that became an eternal roar, the lasting testament of the humble poet from Tus, who, in saving the stories of his land, became the greatest hero of them all. The final echo from the garden is one of quiet triumph, the rustle of wind in the cypress trees, a sound like the turning of 1 billion pages, carrying the immortal verses of the King of Words.